Welcome, everyone. You are listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lorilee Binstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network and anywhere you get your podcast. Today's guest is Tracey Yokas, author of Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. Tracey shares about her family's journey with mental illness and healing so that others will know they are not alone. Tracey earned her master's degree in counseling psychology from California Lutheran University. Tracey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lorilee.
Well, Bloodlines. Let's go ahead and talk about that. What is this memoir about?
Well, thank you for asking. There's two main tracks within it. Specifically related to the title is generational trauma. So what I learned over the course of time, and it took me a very long time to learn it, and I had a lot of help doing so, was this idea that of the patterns that repeat, right? The patterns that get passed down to us that actually got passed down, most of them prior even to that. And if we are unable or unwilling, usually to me it's unable because we just don't even see them or know that it's happening,
Right.
they kind of control us, our behavior, our thoughts, our feelings. And of course, as parents, it plays into that as well. So it was very important to me inside this book, in which I primarily, if you want to call it that, chronicle, starting in 2012. My mother passed away very suddenly. She and my daughter were very close. And this, we would discover, would be a trigger for my daughter's mental health crisis.
Mm.
So I chronicle what we went through, all the things that happened. Well, not all the things that happened, that would be impossible. But the story of us trying to get her help, going through the system, the experiences that we encountered, with also intercutting scenes from my childhood to hopefully illuminate how we can desire, want, need all the things as parents, of course, we do to help our children. And we can also have circumstances and constraints on our ability to do that that we are unaware of.
Well, it's funny because most people who start their own healing, it doesn't really start with because their child, they're worried about what's going on with their child. For me, I mean, in my head, I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor. I've learned the patterns later that that this was generational, and I realized, you know, when I was going through all the bad stuff, I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, my children don't deserve this." And then I became, suicidal. It wasn't like, "Oh, I need to change something," right? I had no idea. It was like you were saying, you just don't know. And so I remember once I started the healing, because I knew my daughter seemed a little triggered when I would yell, obviously, because I would get triggered by something. And it was really, really hard. But then once I went into to a treatment center, and I'm constantly working on myself, I'm seeing the changes that are happening in her, and then I'm like, "Oh, I'm," and then I learned about all this generational cycle stuff, and I was like, "I'm breaking generational cycles." Now I know. But you knew. Was this something that you learned or understood, like, with with school and what you studied in psychology, or how did you realize that this is what I'm gonna do this for her?
Well, I need to tease that apart a little bit because at that time I actually didn't know. So
Mm,
I'm right there with you in terms of not, I understood certainly. I think we can see similarities and things that happen, to our childhood when we have our children and they're starting to grow up. So, for example, in my household, when I was a baby and young and all the way through my entire life, just as one example, for my mom, particularly my weight, My body image, food, calories, all of these things were an enormous deal. So that was something that was constantly criticized and commented on and all this stuff. So you don't really know that that's because it's starting before you can kind of discern these things. It's just how it was. So I didn't think that that was abnormal or unusual because I had known it for my entire life.
Yeah.
I knew it didn't feel good. So then when I had my daughter, I was determined I'm not going to do that. So as we often do, we try to do the opposite. So what I posit in that is that energetically, or whatever word you want to use, doing the opposite doesn't always turn out to be that different because it's still a reaction. It's better because we're aware of the feelings that that engendered in us and that it wasn't good and we didn't like it and all those things. So it can be very complicated, but I do want to be careful to say that at that time in 2012, when my daughter became ill, I did not suddenly know, oh, yes, I need to go in and break all these, cycles of people pleasing, perfectionism, codependency, and enmeshment, a lot of really big words that didn't my the knowledge didn't really come until much later, and in fact, writing the book was a huge part of that healing process and making that as aware as it is now in my consciousness. So I just want to echo again things that I have heard others of your guests say because I think it's super important that we cannot know and certainly not know the extent relative to our childhoods if you had a childhood like mine, like somebody, mentioned the A scale, the adverse childhood experiences, I'm a very low number on that scale. So we can gaslight ourselves into thinking our experiences weren't that traumatic because we had a roof over our head, we had food on the table, we didn't live in poverty, we weren't abused in the traditional sense of the way people understand that. However, we can still have significant trauma related to experiences in our childhood because we don't have the cognitive ability to discern what's going on. So, the relational patterns that are passed down that are abusive and damage us are, again, just something we think is normal.
Yeah. Oh, and I do want to go back. You said, oh gosh, well, you said so many interesting things you said there, but there was one thing that really stood out to me, and I can't. It's eluding me right now, but um, I'll move on, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to that. But so what did you do? What did you do differently to make those changes?
So, so initially in our journey starting out, because of my daughter's mental health crisis, we immediately were in crisis mode. It was not something that started slowly and came on over a long, long period of time. That can happen too. But for us, literally one day she woke up and she's like, I'm not that hungry. And like, we didn't think that much of it because that can happen. But in very short order, she ate less and less and less until she was barely eating anything at all. So
Mm.
we went to the pediatrician who talked to her. So of course I was like, good job, mom, getting right on that and, doing my mom stuff. But, that was not like the pediatrician telling my daughter to eat more did not solve the problem. So, in short order, she was recommending my daughter getting into therapy with an individual therapist who specialized in eating disorders, which of
Mm,
course we did. And I immediately got into my own therapy. I had had already at that point a lengthy relationship with therapy, not only because I had already gotten my degree in counseling psychologist. I am not a therapist, so I need to make that very clear. Um, but I had gotten into therapy the first time when my daughter was 6 months old, because as you alluded to earlier, I knew that I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. I knew that there were patterns, as I mentioned, like around eating. My Weight Watcher leader was my therapist. So I got into therapy for a couple years when she was very young, which was helpful and it helped me clarify some things, but it did not end up illuminating for me that I actually was a survivor of childhood narcissistic abuse and neglect and these things.
mm,
And it wasn't that understanding didn't come until much later. But what I did immediately was get into therapy because I knew I was going to need help navigating these waters from someone who did this for a living.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did actually remind me of what I wanted to ask. You spoke about reaction. You spoke about, you knew what was the wrong thing to do, so you did the opposite. And I feel like everyone with almost everyone with awareness who know that this is happening will do the same thing. Like, I will do better, and by doing better, my reaction will be the complete opposite, but it's still a reaction. And I think that is really important because this is what we do, right? So how do we fight that? How do we actually do the right thing when we actually think doing the opposite is the right thing?
That is a really, really good question. And so the first thing I want to say is we have to be careful about what we mean by do better. Because 100% I agree with you. But I also think as moms, especially of a certain generation, I can tell I'm considerably older than you. I think it's still true. I mean, I have, adult nieces and nephew who's had babies and, toddlers of their own. So I think it's better, but it's certainly not gone, is this idea that doing better means that moms have to try harder. That if I just work harder, and that was certainly true for me. I felt responsible, I felt guilty, I felt shame. I think I was in a shame spiral probably for about 2 years, honestly, when this
Mm,
started, and I couldn't get my way out of it. I felt like I would, if I worked hard enough, I would somehow find the key that would unlock the door to healing my daughter. And what I had to learn over time was, of course, the only person I could control was myself. So yes, we do have to do better, quote unquote, but that means taking a look, and this doesn't mean we did anything wrong. Most of this stuff, again, we've learned before we understand it. So how are our reactions being dictated when our child behaves in certain ways or says certain things, and then we react because we're human beings and it's normal? How do we slow down that process? And let me be clear that for me, by the time this started and my child was having a mental health crisis, again, it took a very long time for us to be able to do this because our lives were in utter chaos. So if anyone is going through that now, I want to make sure to not make it sound like, oh, all you have to do is start paying attention and become aware of what you're doing, and then it goes away, because obviously that is not the case. But to what you said earlier, I look at a family like a system.
mhm.
So everybody in that is impacted. So the only work we can actually do is our own while we are facilitating help for our child if he or she or they need it, but we can only control ourselves. And when we do so, when we start to unpack our reactions, our understanding, our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, learn how to start regulating our own system, learn how to be a calm presence. And as I've heard others of your guests say, learn language that some of us never experienced, so we do not have, which is why it takes a long time to learn how to have a different type of interaction with our child, so that when things are happening, so when my daughter would have dysregulation or a meltdown or whatever word you want to use there, I would immediately fly off the handle with her. So it was like, she's upset. No, I'm upset. And oh my God, the house, everybody's upset. Well,
Yes.
that was a normal thing for me to do because I had never witnessed or seen or experienced anything else. So that is where some of the codependency comes into play. It's like, if she's upset, I'm going to be upset. And, off we go. So understanding that I could make a different choice in reaction to something like that was part of this journey. So, A, it's becoming aware that it's even happening, noticing it, and you don't just do it once. You've got to do all of these things. None of this is a one and done, sadly. I wish we
Mm.
could just know. And then all of a sudden, we didn't do any of the old things anymore. Yay, and we are happy. That's not how it went for me anyway.
No.
So,
No.
you have to become aware over and over and over again, but turn your awareness. I think as parents, we get so triggered by our kids, especially if they're not listening and they're not behaving and all the things that we got in trouble for,
Right.
when we were young. And now, we just think our kids should do what, our parents told us what to do. Our kids should do what we say. And, that. doesn't end up working out all the time.
Right, right.
So awareness is a huge part of it and teasing that apart, and I needed professional help to help me do that.
Yeah, and I say this, and I was on a podcast, I think yesterday, where I spoke about, they're like, what do you say to all these different these this demographic and this demographic? And it was exactly what you were saying. It's like each person needs to find their own healing. They cannot control other people. And if they're trying to help other people, they really can't help other people unless they help themselves first, right? And when it comes to generational cycles, I really do feel I didn't know this before, but you really do have to really figure out what's going on with you and why there's the behaviors are coming out in them, which is then probably triggering you, and then everybody's in chaos. Like you were saying, I was like, I do feel like that is pretty normal amongst the people I know, even though they listen to me, they've heard me speak, and they know. They're like they have awareness of it, but it's still hard. It's the work needs to be done. It is hard work. It is extremely hard work to undo all of the language that, your parents tell you, because I mean, my parents were the same. My parents were, immigrant parents, so they came in and they, based on their culture, like, they had to control the situation, and, nobody talked about mental health, so I think that was a key there. Um, and so what do you have for as far as, like, advice for parents who especially in eating disorder? Because I think in eating disorders are probably one of the more difficult mental challenges to overcome.
Definitely. Well, gosh, you just said a lot of important things there. So, yes, but specifically related to your question, my advice would be first and foremost to definitely get professional help. Eating disorders are serious mental illnesses, and as you pointed out, they are hard to treat. There is no reason why any parent should think they can figure this stuff out on their own. This is information that there's no reason why you would need to know it until you need to know it. So there's no stigma in getting help. That also doesn't mean that your first stop is necessarily the right one. It doesn't mean the first stop, I mean where you're seeking out the help. So as I said, our first stop was an individual therapist for my daughter who specialized in eating disorders. She was going there twice a week. She was also seeing a nutritionist. In fact, she continued to deteriorate over those first many months. And I mean, we went through a gauntlet of things, including eating disorder clinic, including eventually residential treatment, which was devastating for her and for us as well. Calls to 911, hospitalization. So I don't want anyone to think either that, oh, it's just going to like go away, because it can take a very long time for these things to heal. And as parents, too, related to your point, because I always like to also circle back around to tie this into self care, because I think we have a completely skewed view of what self care is and what it means. We understand it in terms of all the external stuff. I love a good mani pedi as much as the next guy. But for me, understanding these patterns at play, like we're talking about. So if I don't value myself, so if I have low self esteem, if I have not identified and started to work on healing my relationship with my shame, if I hate myself, all of these things, you can do all the self care in the world. And if you're not paying attention to these patterns, you will always be hindered in healing, because, excuse me, external things, ever, all of us who have done this, it's always the next thing out there that's going to solve why we feel like crap, why we can't hold on to relationships that make us feel good, why we struggle with intimacy. And I don't mean that sexually, although it certainly can also include that.
Mm.
All of these things, that's inside work. So if we're not looking at self-care now, at a child who has a mental illness to the mix and chaos on top of everything else, I mean, where do you even begin? So
Right.
you begin by getting yourself into therapy. It took me a very long time, almost 2 years, of my therapist asking me almost every week, "What can you do for yourself?" And me being enraged every time she asked that because I didn't think I was worthy of that. My child was suffering. What right did I have? All of these things because I was missing the point. For one, she was asking me to do exactly what I wanted my daughter to do, which is take better care of herself. But for
Mhm.
two, these are the things, understanding these unhealthy patterns, understanding what people pleasing really is and why we do it and how unhealthy it is and our inability to set boundaries and all of these things, that healing works its way out of us from the inside. And that is where the dynamic inside the family system can start to change because as soon as one part of the system changes, homeostasis is a powerful force. So that means like the energy is going to fight against change because
Right.
it likes to stay the same, but it
Mhm.
also has no point but to change when one part of it is changing. If that was a lot of change, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Of course, yes, yes. Yes, change is really hard. Our brains want to stick to what's more familiar, even if it's a very bad, uncomfortable, really negative place. It's used to that, and so it wants to stay there. So that, and I think that's a reason why so many people don't want to change. For me, like my husband's like, "Okay, we're going to get you into a treatment center and we're going to do all this." And then I just remember being like, "No, I'm okay. This is who I am. I don't need to change." And, it took a lot. And in going back to what you were saying about your daughter and, the first place you sought help was not the only place you had to go. When I was in treatment, there were several people there who were there for eating disorders, and this was probably their 6th round with residential treatment centers. So it was really, difficult to understand that. And I think there's just so many things. It's like eating disorders. It's like an addiction, right? Like you can't. It's not that you're addicted to like a substance or anything, but food is all around you, and your body image. It's fixing your body image, right? Is that the center of of it all? Is like the way you see yourself?
Well, that's definitely a huge part of it. And eating disorders have a lot to do with control also. And so the person wanting to be able to feel some semblance of control, really less, I mean, certainly, yes, size and shape is part of it, but really not at the center of it because
Mm.
it's really about having control just over themselves and their circumstances and their life. So, I think a lot of us, especially by popular culture, have been convinced that it's like, it's a diet on steroids or whatever because I want to look better. And that's really not it. So,
Mhm.
yes, it's very, very complicated and it takes a long time. And I think about healing journeys in general, that's something we don't talk about enough. And why I think people can get thrown off course is yes, it's hard enough to start one in the first place because of, the comfort, even if you don't feel good, it's what you know, and also fear related to change. But healing is hard work and it takes a long time. And so I think some people don't actually like to say that out loud because they think people won't try it. And I suppose, maybe that's true. But the other side of that is by not talking about it, when change starts to happen and we're still uncomfortable, that can easily throw someone off too because they're like, "See, I did all of this and I still feel bad," or whatever. But when you're working through this healing process, at some point, you will get a glimmer of the freedom and liberation that's on the other side of being controlled really by these patterns that you're not even aware of, and
Right.
then you will not want to turn back. Because once you get a glimpse of what it's like on the other side of that, and for me, not only was it starting to improve my relationship with my family, but it's like I as soon as I started kind of doing this work in a more conscious way, friendships came into my sphere. So if you're like the energy person, and you're
Yeah.
changing that energy, you start to attract what you desire. And it really, I can't say enough about how it can change your life, but it does take time.
It does. It really does. I mean, when I sought help when I turned 18, right? I was like, I knew something needed to happen, and when I sought that help at the age of 18, you know, I I was 25 when I was diagnosed bipolar, and then I was 35 when they realized I wasn't bipolar and I had PTSD. And so that's a long time of trying to seek out, like, so now, I'm 40, and so it's very much it's very different. Like, it took a very long time. I don't even know how I got here. I feel like when I think back, I'm like 18. That's when I really started seeking out the help I needed, and it wasn't until 35 when I was like, I'm here. So it does take a long time, and I don't want that to be scary for somebody because, even my husband told me when I said, "I'm not going to a treatment center. I'm not." And he specifically said to me, he's like, "You can get yourself better now, and then we have our whole lives to be happy." And I was like, "I don't know if I don't know what that is. I'm never gonna know what that is. This is me." And it is so worth it. It is so worth it because you're not just, especially if you have children, you're not just fixing yourself. You're changing an entire generation for your descendants. You've changed your ancestry, and that is just a crazy thing to think about. And I love how you put it, bloodlines, because your title, bloodlines, it's exactly, you know you're fixing an entire bloodline. And that takes a lot of work, and it's so worth it.
I agree completely. Thank you for saying it that way. And I think the other thing we should say is even though each step maybe wasn't the one, and I'm not, referencing your situation, but for ours, each step maybe wasn't the one that suddenly, corrected course for quite a long time. That doesn't mean that those experiences are wasted.
Right.
So, think of it like the building blocks or, whatever is your preferred metaphor, peeling back the onion, the overused analogy there, every little bit does something. So we're taking action, we're working on it, we're coming back time and again. Because the other thing that happens in a journey like this, especially when we're talking about patterns that are developed, when we're like still in the womb or shortly thereafter, like we forget
Mhm.
until the next thing happens, and then something happens and we're like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on being more conscious. I'm working on not doing what I've always done. I'm developing a methodology for myself when I get into a shame spiral. I even know what that is now. I am starting to be aware of why it happens so that I can know when a trigger comes that I have to take X, Y, or Z action." So I just want to be clear that like while we did have some circumstances that were completely unhelpful, I don't want to say that, that didn't exist at all because of course it did. The
Mhm.
system is very imperfect, but the system is also learning and growing. So the awareness to your point, I didn't get my diagnosis of CPTSD until about 2 years ago.
Mm.
So, I didn't have necessarily other traditional signs of mental illness, but I certainly have my own struggle with my mental health and well being and how that impacts my relations because relational trauma is what I am recovering from.
Mm.
So, yes, it can be very difficult with what might be considered more traditional signs and symptoms, and certainly without them on this journey, but it's still each little step is still a step in the process.
Well, and I think that's the case for so many people. They don't realize that they have CPTSD. I mean, it is as minor as neglect, right? Like, people don't realize the big impact neglect can have, or the gaslighting and all that. And like you were saying, you dealt with a mother who had narcissistic, um, tendencies. And did you realize that while she was alive?
No.
Yeah.
So again, and I think we have to even slow down when we say, oh, just neglect or whatever, because that's what we
Right,
do.
right.
We gaslight ourselves about it. And because we've been gaslit our entire lives. And we have to remember we are applying our adult thinking to this. But it's
Mhm.
happening to us again from the time we're, still in our mother's womb until forever. So this isn't something that happens once in a while. This is an everyday pattern of behavior that forms who we are. So we
Right.
essentially can become like a walking trauma response where every single thought we have, every action we take, everything, every part of our personality is formed on the basis of having this type of upbringing. And then on the other side, if you have like codependency, and this is kind of a mix that I'm learning is commonly, attracted to one another, then all of these behaviors again are forming us. So that's why I mentioned the low ACE score earlier,
Mhm.
is so that we, those of us who had an experience more like mine, don't say to ourselves we should just get over our shit, because first of all, if that was going to work, it would have by now. But really, when you start to unpack and the experiences of your everyday life, you can start to see the kind of control that has. And I need to add that my parents also were supposed to have a second child. So when I was two, my mother was 9 months pregnant and went to have the baby, and the baby was
Mm.
stillborn. So this is something that was never, ever, ever discussed, because silence is another thing that keeps these patterns entrenched. And so I most of the time didn't even know, because I was 2. So as I grew, I didn't even remember that I was supposed to have a baby sister. I didn't remember my mom being pregnant. I didn't remember any of that. And so it wasn't until much later where it was like, "Oh my god." So they lose a child. They certainly didn't forget that they were supposed to have another child.
Right.
So the grief and the mourning and the unattended to their own traumas so getting their own passed down, then they have their life experiences, and then they come together and they have more things. So these are things that compound, and if you're not looking at it, you don't know what's going on, you're certainly not dealing with it, and you're not talking about it, it's a recipe for a lot of not good stuff.
Right. Wow. Yeah, and you make a good point, and I want to backtrack and say I didn't mean something minor, but what other people see as minor who aren't really in the space because, I am a childhood sexual abuse survivor. I was sexually abused by my father, but and I once I healed all of that, I realized that the trauma I had from my own mother because I was an accident, so my mom always kind of treated me like that. Like she did have a miscarriage before my brother. She had my brother. My brother's 9 years older, but she thought that was it, and so when I came, it was a very unhappy surprise, and I felt like that. Even as you were talking about energy. Even though I didn't understand the communication that was being spoken to me as a child, I felt the energy there, and I had to heal that too. And that I'm still healing. That I feel like I've come to terms with, the generational cycle of abuse, from my father, but the neglect, the not feeling wanted, I'm still working on that to this day. So I feel like that impact of the everyday stuff is extremely difficult to kind of heal yourself from. I mean, healing is definitely an ongoing process, but I know for a fact that this is one of those things where I've had a really difficult time trying to get through was that feeling of worthiness.
Absolutely, and for me, it's very similar, if something happens where I get a sense of being rejected.
Yes. Yeah,
That's
that
when
took a
I
while.
will still my therapist and I were just talking about it yesterday, like, "Oh, this thing happened and I got, triggered, and then I feel," all the things still happen, so I'm certainly validating your point. And not to be, the point over and over again, but I just wanna say, obviously, it's very important as adults, we do have discernment to know that, someone who scores very high in the ACE or whatever has experiences like that is very, very difficult. So it's a fine dance, because, we've been taught, especially in this culture, again, we've got to compare everything and everybody, and we're judging all the time and all this stuff. So I think that's part of the problem though, is because
Yeah.
like I would say to myself, well, this didn't happen to me and this didn't happen to me and this didn't happen to me. So, what do I have to complain about? My childhood was great. And so, obviously, on one hand, it's important to have the discernment to know that I did not experience a lot of very traumatic things. But if that is preventing us, if we're gaslighting ourselves with that information
Right.
and preventing us from getting the help we need or looking at these patterns, then we're doing ourselves and everyone else a disservice. So it's just a very fine, dance in terms of language, which is always complicated because every person understands things in their own way through their own lens. But I mean, it's what we've got. So,
Mhm.
we're going to keep working on it.
Right. 100%. Well, is there anything that you would like to add? Anything that you want to touch on? I do. How, before we go there, how do you find healing each day? Like, is there something that you do that helps you kind of I don't know, maybe it is get your nails done, but I know I heard you say you see your therapist, which I absolutely love because I see my therapist every other week. Um, but there's something that you do to maintain that?
Yeah, actually. So one of the things, once I finally woke up to the fact that my therapist was, encouraging me to understand self-care, it's not an either or. So, yes, the outside stuff too, right? Mind, body, spirit, outside
Mhm.
stuff, reading books that soothe our soul, doing these things. It's not one or the other. But I had no relationship with my intuition. I had no relationship with self trust, with self compassion. So I had to get quiet for a little while and just like kind of try to think about what would be meaningful to me. And for me, what arose was a return to creative practice. I'd been a very creative
Mhm.
child. My dad was very talented artist, although he didn't follow that passion. So I very slowly started getting back into a style of art called mixed media art journaling.
Mm, okay.
And I was reading a lot of books. I shifted my focus from reading about eating disorders and reading about depression and reading about self-harm and trying to learn that's important to do. So I
Mhm.
don't, again, it's not an either or. But after, a couple years of doing that, when I realized, oh, I can only control myself, then I started reading more about the type of material that I needed for myself and like using language and ideas and imagery to work in a journal. Because if you're a parts person, parts of us need expression that don't have words. So that's where imagery can come into play. And also a creative practice, less so now, although it still happens, but I've been doing it for a long time. It very much concretized the perfectionistic tendencies inside of me. If I were,
Mm.
made a page that I thought was ugly and I wanted to rip it to shreds and set it on fire, I mean, it was like, oh, okay. So my inner critic would get totally triggered, and then it was more fodder for me to work on. So
Wow.
for sure, my healing journey really, really, and still to this day, I mean, I have a community of women who I was very intentional about creating, who come together to make art every month. I teach art for non-artists because creativity is a human right. It's not a privilege, although we get that taught out of us as well when we're young. Like if we can't do it to make money, we shouldn't do it at all. So that was a huge part of my healing journey because I could then take these thoughts and feelings I was having about myself that were now in my awareness and bring that into my therapy and, and work on them.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, well, that's amazing. Actually, I really would like to kinda look into that, mixed media journaling.
Yeah, I'll send you a
I've
link.
Oh, yeah, please. I've and I'll also share that as well. So is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I really want, if anyone is listening who has a child going through a mental health crisis in today's day and age, we know the stats post pandemic are going in the wrong direction. So I want you to know that you're not alone. I want you to know that as scary as it is and as complicated as it can be, there are people out there who can help you, who have gone through what you're going through. You are not alone. I was convinced that we were the only, family on the
Mhm.
planet who was suffering like this, and it's just not true. So I do want to encourage people to reach out if that's the situation, because again, there's no reason why you should know how to deal with having a child that has mental illness. I mean, that's not something you need to know until you need to know it.
Right.
So, get the help to help you navigate the waters, because they are very turbulent.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That was very helpful, and this conversation was extremely helpful and validating for me. So,
Thank you. Me
thank you
too.
for that.
Thank you.
Well, that was Tracey Yokas, author of Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. To purchase her book, please go to the show notes and you will find a link there as well as links to Tracy's website. October's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com, as well as past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. Join us next week when I speak with Scott Grace when we talk about mindful masculinity. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. I'm Lorilee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.